Welcome to the Tax Awareness Show. My name is Shillyboy Mothiba. I'm your host. And today on our segment, I'm actually going to take you through what caught my attention in the world of tax. Between March and April, so far in the mid-April, a lot had taken place in the field of tax. We have seen on the 12th of March, where the Minister of Finance announced the national budget, and subsequently on the 1st of April, we've seen the Commissioner of SARS announcing the estimated tax revenue collections. And in that regard, there was a lot of discussions, there's a lot of debate that actually are still ongoing. And I'm going to take you through this. I've got my legislations with me. I've got my notes with me. So we're going to sit back and just unpack some of the things that I believe that caused, or rather caught my attention. And the starting point came from during the budgets, where there was debate on whether to introduce wealth tax. That particular debate has been with us for many years, right? Has been with us many years. If you also goes back in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, where the commissioner from the commission from Judge Davies tax commission, they actually also looked into that topic on whether South Africa should be introducing wealth tax or not. So now, with the budget deficit being persistent, and also the issue of that increase, with some commentators saying, should we be actually, particularly from political parties, saying that should we be actually introducing the VAT increase? If you remember, there was actually a postponement of the national budget speech, where the initial thing was to introduce, or rather increase, the VAT rate with 2%. And then subsequently there was no consensus at the parliament or cabinet. And then the Minister of Finance was requested to go back with his team to revise and look at ways of actually presenting a revised national budget. And subsequently, we've seen that Minister of Finance and announced 0.5% from the 1st of May, and also another 0.5% increase from 1st of April 2026. Now, within that, there have been a lot of discussions about whether we should be introducing wealth tax. So there have been views from the likes of SARS Commissioner, there have been views from political parties, there have been views from economists, and others referring us to saying the introduction of wealth tax has never worked where it was introduced. I mean, they've given various countries, and as an example, with others saying that where it nearly worked was in Switzerland. But then if you look at what happened in Switzerland, was that they actually substituted wealth tax with income tax. So it's slightly different. Now, then when you look at, I mean, when I attended, I happened to attend SARS results press and media briefing, right? And the question was also posed to the commissioner to say, should we be introducing tax, or what's their take on, what's SARS take on issue of introduction of wealth tax? And we need to be clear here, the separation of duties here. Because if you look at SARS is mandated to do tax administration. It's not mandated to come up with tax policies. That the tax policy proposals are sitting at National Treasury, though they are legislated by the Parliament and other stakeholders within the Parliament confines, right? So it needs to be clear. So this question on tax policies wouldn't ordinarily be sitting well with the SARS, because SARS is mandated for tax administration. However, the commissioner emphasized something, that the SARS is position to advise. It can only advise the Minister of Finance. And he actually took us through his thought process, or SARS position, on if they were to advise the Minister of Finance, what would they be actually saying, or what would be their views, such that they can be considered in that process of finalizing the tax policy of the country on whether to introduce wealth tax. And within that, the questions that they pose is that, and I'm just gonna highlight some of the things that he actually raised as the commissioner, to say, when we're saying wealth tax, what is this wealth tax? How do we can we come up with a definition for what is a wealth tax, right? Because you would have agreed with me that there've been other comments or other commentators where they defined a wealth tax as tax that will be derived from be it individuals, be it in the main individuals, that because it's leaning towards individuals being taxed on the total assets minus liabilities. So that is basically how people define the wealth, and then tax being proposed on their net worth, meaning that the gross value of assets and minus the liabilities, then you will typically get what we call a wealth tax. Okay, now that's one way of defining it that we're hearing out there, but Commissioner is posing back to say, what is wealth tax? And once we understand what is wealth tax, then we'll be able to start to identify these individuals to say, okay, we've actually defined wealth tax. Where do we allocate these wealthy, so-called wealthy people? But another thing that will probably be more relevant to the SARS will be about the issue of administration. And I remember reading somewhere one of the articles mentioning about the issue of capacity that will be required to actually administer the wealth tax. So we also need to ascertain whether the what you call SARS will have capacity, and if it doesn't have capacity to administer the wealth tax, what will be required to actually administer that particular wealth tax. And those things are very, very important, because you and I can agree that we can have a brilliant tax policy, but if it's not administered properly, we're still going to have a problem. The tax revenue estimated or expected tax revenue collections that we expect to be collected as a result of that tax policy may actually not be realized, because not being able to administer that particular tax policy. So, and these are the things that the commissioner is actually raising. And I mean, I'm posing to you also, if you are one of those that are saying, let's actually introduce wealth tax, can you guide us on how we're going to go about that? I'd like to hear your view. Perhaps you are involved in this in the tax policy space. You can discuss. You can refer us to some of your views or some of papers you may have written on around this matter. But again, those who are saying we should not be introducing wealth tax, what are your argument? Further to that is even the commissioner raised something to say, if you look at a South African tax system, it has already has other types of taxes that are biased towards a wealth tax. Because why? Let me give you an example. If you look at a transfer duty act, it's basically tax on wealth, because property is wealth, right? And it typically leans towards the wealthy, because the higher the value of your property, the higher you're going to pay that particular transfer duty, particularly with the exemptions. I think now with the revised figures about 1.2. So if you buy a property of about 1.2, you're not going to be subjected to wealth tax. I mean, to transfer duty. So that on its own, it tells you something about this particular wealth, to say the wealthier you get, the more tax you pay when it comes to the transfer duty. Now, that is one part of the types of taxes that we have, that in the view of the commissioner is that we already have similar types of taxes that are leaning towards the wealth tax. Then secondly is the issue of capital gain tax. Similar capital gain tax, the higher wealth you have, the more capital gain tax probably going to have end up paying, as Commissioner mentioned. But also, if you look at the issue on primary residence, that there are exclusions in terms of the capital gain that you make in terms of disposing the property. So meaning that those people at the lower end, where the capital gain it is not existing or is not more than the exclusion on after disposing that particular property as a primary resident, therefore you're not going to be subjected to capital gain tax on that particular capital gain. So which means that the higher the capital gain on disposal of the primary resident, the more you're going to actually pay tax on that particular. So already that is also, the higher the wealth you get, the more you're going to pay tax. But also, those who invest in properties and not as primary resident then will be subjected to capital gain tax without any form of exclusion. That also on its own, it can be interpreted as a way of actually saying that the wealthier you are, you get, actually the more you're going to be subjected to wealth tax. Okay, now that is one example. Another example one can say is the estate duty. As you will know that there's an exclusion for those that at the lower end where you could be excluded. It's about 3.5 million to say any net value rather on the estate, right? The net estate value that is less than 3.5 is not subjected to an estate duty. So that on its own also it's signal that the wealthier you get in your passing, then your estate is going to be subjected to higher tax. So that, and if you remember, there were changes actually from the recommendation from the Judge Davis, where the estate duty was actually also increased to 25% on anything above 30 million. So that also signals something around types of tax that is actually biased towards taxing the wealth. That is one form. One other form is donation tax. That on also its own, to say the more you've won money, the wealth, and you're donating it, giving it back to your kids or people that you want to donate to, subjected to certain exemptions, you will be subjected to donation tax. So these are some of the types of taxes that other commentators who are against, or rather who don't see the feasibility of wealth tax being introduced, are arguing that, to say the South African tax system is actually already accommodating this. But they are also asking a question to say, if we're introducing wealth tax, then what are we replacing it with? So what are we replacing? So that is very, very, very important, right? So now, with that said, so one of the things also around wealth tax that is actually being and that is very, very, very important. So one of the argument also around the issue of wealth tax that the commissioner has actually highlighted is the issue of, if you look at the tax revenue collected from personal income taxes, right? We so far, and I mean that's exactly what he actually also discussed, which is, these are the documents that you can actually also have access to from National Treasury. If you look at the number of registered individuals, right, roughly around 60 million, just to round up the numbers, around 60 million, and half of those registered taxpayers actually don't pay tax, which means that they are earning an income that is below tax threshold, right? So, and then only the rest of those are paying tax. But when you actually analyze those numbers in detail, is that about 3.5% of those registered taxpayers actually pays close to 50% of collected pay, which is about close to 600,000 of individuals. So now already tells you something, that the wealthier, and those are the people that actually earns more than $1 million, right? So it already shows you that the people are already, very few people contribute to our personal income tax that we collect. Now, if one of the arguments that is being shared is that if we continue to tax these people, how will they react? Because the reality is that individuals, we all know that the more we tax them or the less we tax them, there's a behavioral change in response to how we approach this. So, which means that should we perhaps look into increasing the tax rate at that particular bracket, or for that matter, in changing our tax policies, such as introduction of wealth tax, we must expect some form of behavioral change around them. Some people may decide to change on how their remuneration packages actually are structured. Some people may consider to leave the country and work somewhere else where their tax is actually more favorable to their way. So it's more or less going to have an impact on that progress. And it's something that others who are actually against the introduction of wealth tax are actually referencing it and are arguing that we should actually be mindful of that. But maybe let me pause it this, rather let me stop it here and allow you to comment, share with me, engage me, tell me what's your take on issues of introduction of wealth tax, and what's your take? Should we introduce it? Should we not introduce it? If you're for it, please justify that, share with me, refer me to articles. Let's have a debate around this issue. But again, if you are against it, please share with me and argue your points and share with us some of documents that you actually saying you should be against them.